session, which we'll make it available for those that are going to be watching it not live, and for those who are here for the live version and would like to watch it again or share it with colleagues. I think links will be made available to these presentations as soon as we have them uploaded and ready for your viewing. My name is Mark McKell, and I'm pleased to introduce Andy Fisher, Martin Lenord, Eric Preston, Claude Vervoort, who will be giving us a presentation today about migrating from earlier versions of LTI to LTI 1.3 Advantage. And just note that Andy, Martin, and Claude are also the co-chairs of the LTI project group. So I'm grateful for their willingness to share their insights and expertise in working with LTI. So if you do have questions, please feel free to submit them through the chat, and we'll maybe try to interact with them on the chat or save time to respond to them at the end of our meeting. We might go over a little bit for those that need to leave throughout the meeting, or at the top of the hour, feel free and exit if there is time and willingness to stay after. We're happy to do so and answer questions that we don't get to within our 30-minute allotted time. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andy.
Thanks, Mark. So I think that we've been talking about this quite a bit, and we did some roundtables recently with LTI. And one of the big questions is not, hey, how do I start with 1.3? It's really, I'm already doing LTI 1.1, and how do I do 1.3? There's some differences on institutions and tools and LMSs, and I think we've got to split this up a little bit between the different vendors and the institutions. I'm going to talk about the institution side and what your take should be. This is not going to be, hey, this is an introduction to LTI. This is an introduction to moving from one version of LTI to the new version of LTI. And this is a bit based off of my own experiences at Penn State and going through this with, probably 10, 15 tools right now. We have about 30 or so integrations that we have, and we have a bunch of them that are now going through the 1.3 process. So there's my email address if you have any questions, anf107@psu.edu. Feel free to reach out. We have our own vetting process. A lot of folks always ask, hey, how do you vet tools? What do you do? Can you just give us your list of tools that you certified or that you want to put in? It's usually not a great conversation because everybody's rules are different. We have a very strict set of rules that we follow, but that is very different than what you'll follow if you're in Europe. There's been some GDPR conversations, but we're very different how we handle that information here. But we can help coordinate and talk through some issues we might have had or experience with different tools. And if you need any background, I'm happy to help out. So what do you do when you want to get started? So you have your LTI 1.1 tool, and a vendor says, I am ready to go with 1.3. The very first thing we found you need to do is go out and make sure that they are certified. Quite often you will get somebody from the marketing end or the product side that says they are ready, but that doesn't mean that folks like Martin and Claude have really made the tool yet, that it is supposed to be ready in about a month and they just want to get out ahead of you. So I would recommend you go and check the certification list. Being the front of the line is great, but then you do experience a lot more problems. So we want to make sure that a lot of those things are already worked out. So make sure their certification is complete, and that what they're asking for, if there's any services along with it, are also certified. So here's just a screenshot with APHIS. They have a couple of different names and role services, assignment and grade services, and so on. And you're really going to look for the learning tools interoperability version 1.3 is the kind of the base, and then the services added on top of that, if they do have any services. Now, what type of integration? Is this a new 1.3 integration for you at your institution, or is this an upgrade? New, I would treat it just like you do any other 1.1 integration. You gather the requirements, you go through any documentation, you figure out a deployment plan, you try it out on a test system, you get your list of users, you figure out the right area you want to put it in, and then you configure it and place it in your LMS, right? And that's it. Now, if you're going to an upgrade, this gets where it gets more complicated. Remember that your vendors are providing you with a service, right? They have a LMS and a tool, right? You're the customer, and make sure you treat it that way. You're not the one who's doing all the work of converting content, rewriting different tools and placements and rebuilding courses, right? That's not a very good product if that is what's given to you, and you have to do that because of either deficiency in your LMS or the deficiency in the tool. And a good integration will make that stuff easier for you. And Claude and Martin are going to talk about some of the things they can do to make that work a lot better for you, so it's less of a workload on the upgrade process for you. But there is a difference in upgrading and new. Remember, here's I talk about the integration of the feature. There's some basic stuff they can do. Domain matching, you want to worry about placement. Some of the times the locations where those tools are at can get moved. You have to worry about what happens to old courses. So we at Penn State have to keep content around for several years after that course ends. What are your plans for upgrading those courses? So if you have 4 or 5 years of courses in there and only one semester it's active, you have almost 10 times your workload of updating old courses that no one will probably ever look at for this new course that's happening in the future. So if you do an upgrade, you got to think about that as well. That if there is a requirement to get their build content and courses, what do you do about the old courses? Do you still have to do that? And what do you want to handle there? You have to think about the conversion time frame. Do you really want to do this during your final exam week and possibly move all the content from the course and break a whole bunch of courses? Work out your documentation, work out your communications. Okay, so if there's a conversion, that stuff is all more important than when you put the tool in the first time, because there's a change. People always expect things to work. When you break them, it's a critical need, right? If there's a tool that's going in for the first time, people are sometimes a little bit easier to deal with. Oh, it's new. But if you break someone's workflow or their tool that they've been relying on for several years, on a Monday morning, they're not going to be happy. So make sure you have all that lined up and ready to go. So why should I require LTI 1.3? And this is where, if you've noticed, I'm talking everything about the upgrade. Upgrading a tool that's in place is much harder than just putting a tool in the first time. So let's say a vendor comes to you today and says, hey, I have LTI 1.1, 1.3 won't be ready for 2 months. I would recommend that you wait and get LTI 1.3 unless there is something you have to have in that current integration right now. Because you're going to have to worry about the upgrade process then. All that bad stuff that happens when you upgrade, you're going to have to worry about and deal with it. So encourage your vendors to have the most current version out there when you want to put it in. This is where you really, the consumers and institutions, this is where you guys can really step in and help out. If there's more push to put the new tool out there, the new certification process out there, it's a lot easier because then you don't have to worry about an upgrade. It's just a new tool. And new tools are always easier to put in than an upgrade. Because you're eventually going to have to upgrade that 1.1 tool at some point, right? Unless you are no longer at that institution. Someone there at your institution is going to have to worry about upgrading it at some point. So it's easier if you have less of those to deal with. So that's kind of the last slide I had. I only had like 5 minutes, so I think I stayed true to form. Maybe I ran a minute over. Sorry. So I think
I go next.
Claude's next? Okay.
Yeah, I'm going next, yes.
I'll stop sharing. It's all yours, Claude.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So migration from LTI 1.1 to Advantage. So the idea here, we're changing everything how the specification works on the wire. I mean, it's what's exchange and all the protocols have changed. But the idea is that yet nothing has changed. What is meant by that is that you don't need to rebuild your courses. Going back to the point here is that the specification were built to allow migration paths. And so this presentation is going to tell you how the migration was built from the specification standpoint. It's not going to go into each LMS approach to it, but really to show you how the specification was built to allow a way to migrate from 1.1 to Advantage. And so that you don't need to rebuild your courses, you don't need to recreate the links, you don't need to change your gradebook columns. You should be able to migrate in place for your courses. So, okay, so here we're really again changing the transport, but the data is the same. So the question is going to be, where did my data go? Where is my 1.1 data now in this new LTI 1.3 Advantage payload? And so we're going to look at the different piece of data and where you're going to find them back into a 1.3 tool when you move from 1.1. So the very first one is at the launch URL. And so a tool might or might not use the launch URL, but often the launch URL is a very important piece of information about which resource you need to show up in your tool. And in LTI 1.1, well, the launch URL was the launch URL. The platform was launching to that URL. So you would know the launch URL automatically because that's where you get the LTI payload to. But that's no more the case in LTI 1.3 because in LTI 1.3, the launch URL is actually never launched to from the LMS. What is used are the OpenID related URLs, the initiate login URIs and the redirect URIs. So launch URL is actually never launched to from the LMS. So where do you find it? Well, it's now going to be passed to you as a parameter called the target link URI. And you're going to get it in the above flows, is the initiate login endpoint, and the it's also going to be included into the ID token message. So you're gonna find back into the LTI 1.3 payload, the original launch URL, and you will be able to know what was the intended resource you had to display. Not that you don't have as a tool to do the redirect to that final endpoint. It just tells you where it was what was the 1.1 endpoint that this link was about. And it's up to you to decide how to go to that destination, which means that your old endpoint can keep receiving 1.1 traffic anyway, because they won't receive 1.3 traffic. So that's for the launch URL. Now for the payload in itself, so we're moving from a form post to JSON representation, so a bit more structured data. But outside of that, you should find more or less everything should kind of make sense where it moved. For everything related to identity, we're using the OpenID claims because it's an ID token, it's OpenID flow. And so the most important one is the sub, which used to be your user ID. So again, your LTI 1.1 user ID, the value should now be the sub value. And it should map. And some LMSs would have to change it. I'll cover that a little bit later. But usually, the value should be the same. They just move into the OpenID claims. And so LTI also added a bunch of LTI related claims for the rest of the LTI payload. And again, here it's going to be fairly straightforward. The message type goes to the message type claim. Resource link, as you see here, it was a bunch of keys, and now it's actually a little object called resource link, but the same resource link ID should be preserved, and so on. Same the context ID, which is your cross identifiers, is going to be preserved on migration to 1.3. So that goes for all the payload. Should be a fairly straightforward remapping to the LTI message type JSON representation. So now, we've seen that the actual LTI message, and now let's look at the ability to report a grade, which was a very important feature of 1.1. So that was basic outcome. And so with the assignment and grade services, one of the key objectives was to be able to support the exact same flow. And so the flow of LTI 1.1 is that you click on a link, and this LTI payload contains enough information for you to be able to report a grade back. And so the same flow is possible now with assignment and grade services, but just the data that you use for that is a little bit different. So in LTI 1.1, you were using the outcome service URL and the result source ID to return a grade, and the grade was normalized 0 to 1. And so that's what you had with basic outcome. And now with assignment and grade services, you're actually grading a line item and a user. So line item is your gradebook column, and you're getting into the LTI message payload, you're getting the URL of that given column. So where to post grade for a given column. That is a column linked to the activity you just launched, and you use the user ID, which is a sub, to post a score. So again, for that line item and user, and the score now can be a points versus points possible. So it doesn't have to be normalized anymore. You can say 20 out of 25 or something like that. And it's a service now, and in LTI Advantage, it's going to be protected by an access token. And so that means that you can actually change in flight, because the very same column under 1.1, you would have received the result source ID identifying a cell, and you would have returned a value for that cell. And when you move to 1.3, you receive a line item URL for this full column, and you have the user ID to again return a value to that same sub, to the same cell here. So I'm not going to go into details here, but if you were using content item message, it's now deep linking, and it's the same capabilities. It's just now using JSON web token and the JSON format, and we removed any reference to JSON LD, so it simplified a little bit the representations. And same goes for membership service. So it's a new name, it's slightly simpler payload, but the same capabilities, you'll find them there. But you, as a tool implementers, you know that those formats have changed a little bit, so you have to do work there to adapt to the new to the simplified format. Finally, an important piece in the way things work. So, as around the identity of the relationship between a consumer and a tool. in 1.1, the tool was usually crafting the identity of the platform. It was giving a consumer key and secret. And so, but in 1.3, it's reversed. It's the LMS which is giving an identifier of the tool deployment. And so the flow here are a little bit different. So in 1.1, you could create a key and a secret, give it to the LMS, and they could put it in many courses. You could duplicate that information many times. You don't have to centralize to make it centralized. And it would not matter. We would come back to the tool, and the tool would see the consumer key and secret and know which account you're talking about. In 1.3, in 1.3, it's reversed. Every deployment of the tool is going to be identified by a triple, which is the issuer, the client ID, the of client ID, and the LTI deployment ID, which identifies really the tool deployment. And every deployment of that tool is going to have a different identifier. So you have to do work on first launch on the tool side to bind this tool deployment identifier crafted by the LMS to an actual account. So it's a one-time resolution that the tool will prompt the user to accomplish on first launch. And that's why it's often preferred in LTI Advantage to do to avoid fine-grained deployment, like course level deployment, but rather have a site level deployment. So that this binding needs to happen only once. And finally, so I said that user ID, context ID, this value did not change, but some platforms, they may have had to change it. And if they had to change it, they're going to include an additional claim called LTI 1.1, which are going to contain the old LTI 1 issues. So the idea here is that if you see a value in here, that means this is the old value because the platform had to change their user ID. Maybe they changed the full model because they moved to LTI Advantage. So they had to issue new identifiers, in which case they will give you the old identifiers in that claim. And there is also another piece here, which is the old consumer key. And the old consumer key being signed with the old secret. And this allows you, if you go back to the previous slide here, this allows you, if it's included in the payload, to automatically rebind this deployment to your old LTI 1.1 deployment. So that to avoid, to ask the user to reassociate, if it's present, as a tool, you can automatically rebind to the old contract because you have the key and again it's signed by the old secret. So you really know that this new LTI 1.3 deployment is actually the same as the old 1.1 deployment. So as that support is optional. So a platform may or may not give you this information on launch. And after that, the platforms are really going to tell you all the fine details about migration, and they can adopt very different strategies. Some might do in-place update where you have your tool configuration and you toggle it from 1.1 to 1.3, 1.3 to 1.1. So it's really a change in the configuration of the tool. Others are going to ask you to deploy a new LTI 1.3 tool aside the 1.1 tool and use domain matching to basically preempt the old links to go to the new LTI 1.3 configuration. So it's going to be a mix of those things, and some will allow you to do course by course, some will allow you to do all at once. And so again, that's going to be the platform are going to illustrate that. So on this, we're going to see a couple of platform demo, and you're going to see the different flavors of this migration right now. So Martin.
You're at stop sharing?
Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing if I find the button again. Yeah, here.
Okay. So I'm just going to demonstrate what it looks like for Turnitin running in Moodle. And although what Claude has just gone through might have sounded a little bit overwhelming with lots of stuff to think about, the actual end product of it is pretty straightforward. So here I have a course set up in Moodle with an LTI 1.1 assignment that I've created, and this should launch into Turnitin. It's got a submission on it. It's standard LTI 1.1 with basic outcomes. And if I wanted to change that over to LTI 1.3, for the end user, all they've got to do is go to their configuration, and here's my configuration that I'm using for that assignment. It's a global configuration, and you can see here the LTI version is 1.0 and 1.1, so I've got my consumer key and secret and that information that needs to go in there. I just switch that to LTI 1.3. Now for the kind of magic of demonstrations, this is already filled in. You'd have to go to your Turnitin account and fill out the necessary information and then copy the other information back into here. And once you've done that, you can just say save. And now that has been upgraded from LTI 1.1 to 1.3. All the links that were 1.1 will now be launched with those 1.3 credentials instead. So let's go back to this assignment that we were looking at, and we're going to reload it. So what you'll see is that the first time we try and load it, rather than getting the LTI inbox that you were seeing before for Turnitin, you'll get this login. And that's because we don't know about this deployment yet, so we want to know where we want to rebind it back up to. So I can just say, help if I could spell my name. I'll just log into this and say, okay, I'm going to select the roundtable. And I want to link it back up to this account. So this is the account that I was using in LTI 1.1. And now we know on Turnitin's side that all of those links that we're getting that were in 1.1 before are now going to be coming through in 1.3 for this particular deployment. And click it again. So this time, rather than showing me the login page, it will actually load the inbox. And that's a one-time thing that you have to do just to build that link, basically. And then once that's done, you can see that now we have a working deployment. And this is now all LTI 1.3 using the assignments and grade service. So if I was to submit a new submission or regrade this existing submission, it would use the assignments and grade service rather than using LTI 1.1. So for the sake of time, I'm going to leave it at that and hand over to Eric to show what it looks like in Blackboard.
Thank you, Martin. What screen am I sharing? I am sharing this desktop. So in Blackboard with LTI 1.1, you register a tool provider by its domain. So when I say register tool provider, I have to give it a domain. I can give it secondary domains. And so we only allow one tool provider, we only allow one domain per, we only allow a domain to be owned by one tool provider. Because we need to be able to do domain matching to import common cartridge links and understand what tool they're associated with, and for other reasons around domain matching that's just in the spec. So I have already created a LTI provider that I have at this URL or this domain, lti.int.bbpd.io. It's my little test one. And if I go log in, or if I go in as an instructor, go into my course, I've got two existing links. I've got this one that was created via deep linking. And so that launches my LTI 1.1 tool. You can see the context ID. You can see the user ID down here, and you can see the resource ID here. And if I log in as a student, and I have 3 browsers open, so I can be logged in as 3 different people at the same time. If I log in as a student and I launch one of these LTI 1.1 tools and give myself a grade, let's make it 0.7. This is the old basic outcomes. It takes a number from 0 to 1. And I look at the grade book, you'll see that I got a 7 out of 10 because the max points was 10. But now this tool is a LTI 1.3 tool. And the app developer, the tool developer, has gone to what we call our developer portal, our central service to manage applications. And they've created a new application. And it's on the same domain. So we just want to upgrade the existing LTI 1.1 tool to 1.3. So we do all the LTI 1.3 definition of exchanging the URLs and the URLs basically in the signing algorithm. One of the things that you'll notice that we can do now in Blackboard is I can manage placements. Sorry, wrong tool. I can manage placements right here in the dev portal in one central location. And so I've got 2 placements defined. Now, if we go back to the admin screen and I say, I want to register, oh, first we have to go back here and say, I have an application ID or a client ID. And I want to register my LTI Advantage tool. And I type in that client ID. It says you're about to migrate this tool from 1.1 to 1.3. And the reason why we know that is because the domains match. So if any domain in the 1.3 tool matches any of the domains in the 1.1 tool, we can't have them both deployed at the same time at the institution. It just, we just don't allow it, like for the domain matching rules that I mentioned earlier. So now's your chance to say, do you want to upgrade? I say, surely I do. So it fills in all the information about that tool. And I say submit. And now my old tool is gone, but my new tool is here, and it's called LTI Migrate. And when I look at my placements, these are just where the links, the LTI links surface in the course. I now have all these. I have the 3 originals from 1.1, and I have the 2 new ones from 1.3. And if I go back into my course as the instructor, and I launch the tool, it's a different screen because it's a different version of the tool. But my user ID, which is now the sub, is the same. My context, I'm going to find it right here. My context ID, which is the course ID, is the same. And the resource ID is right here, the resource link, it's the same. And so I've got the same information, and I didn't really have to, as an instructor, I certainly didn't have to do anything differently. And as an administrator, all I had to do was to deploy the new tool, and I migrated it from 1.1 to 1.3. The links all still work. I can go to assignment and grades. No, I can't. Not with this one.
You forgot to enable it.
Yeah, I know. That was a mistake on my part, wasn't it? I'm running out of time. Where do I, oh yeah, sorry, real quick. Boom, boom. Forgot to enable grades. That's an institution policy level thing. So now if I launch it and I go to assignment and grades, I can see the grades that were set for that. And I can see that, well, actually, it's better if I go back to Sue and I go into, so she's got a 7 now. And if I go in, oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. And I go into this item again, Sue launches over. She's got a 7, but she doesn't like that grade. So she wants to give herself a new grade. And she says, what's my user ID? And my user ID is that. Now I go to assignment and grades, and I set the score for Sue to an 8. And now when I go to the grade book, it's not graded because the instructor has to post the grade. That's a different change with how we handle grades in Ultra with the new assignment and grade service. But if I go back in as the instructor and go to the grade book and look at these, I see that Sue has an 8, and I can post that grade. And now it shows up as a 0.8. That's because I didn't handle the min and the max right in my brain. But Sue will then go look at her grade book and see that she's got a 0.8, which is not a very good grade. But anyway, so that's it.
All right, so we are just about at the top of our half hour, top of the hour, ending our half-hour session. So if anyone has questions, would like to stick around and review those with our presenters, feel free to stay. For those who need to drop, appreciate your attendance. I'm going to paste a link in the chat. If you enjoy these topics and would like to participate in some of our future roundtable meetings, those take place typically on the 4th Tuesday of the month. We'll have one next week, next Tuesday, where we'll be talking about dynamic registration and seeing some demonstrations. So these monthly roundtable sessions are a great place to come and learn more about LTI, especially if you're going through implementing the spec or understanding what it's about and hearing from these experts on best ways to go about it. So if you do, again, need to go, feel free and drop off. If you want to stick around and have any specific questions, we can accommodate that. Recordings of this session will be made available as soon as we can. So watch for links to see this or be able to review this again. So does anyone have any questions? And feel free to just unmute yourselves and pose the question or type it in the chat if you'd like.
Yeah, this is Yona, Appletree from Concentric Sky. We have a question about LTI 1.3 deployment scopes in the various LMSs.
As in what they cover or where you can deploy to?
I wasn't sure if I should ask the full question right now. Yeah, so basically in Blackboard specifically, there's, and correct me if I get this wrong, but there's one LTI 1.3 deployment per tool per Blackboard server, essentially. And that model differs a bit from LTI 1.1, where the creation of the analog to a deployment was controlled by the tool, and you could create multiple key and secret pair or ID and secret pairs that could be installed in the LMS. And in Blackboard, with LTI 1.3, there's now the single deployment. And I'm curious if other LMSs are handling that in a similar way. Is that kind of the recommended path forward, or is that our LMS is handling that differently?
So even on LTI 1.1, Blackboard limited to one domain per, one registration per domain. So if you had a key and a secret, you wouldn't have been able to have two different keys and secrets that both pointed to the same domain.
On the same server.
Yeah, so for instance, turnitin.com or something like that, if that was where the tool was pointing to, then yeah, you would only be able to do that once. And the reason for that is so that domain matching works, because if you then go and delete that registration in 1.1 or 1.3 and then decide that you want it back again later, or you import something from Common Cartridge, some links from Common Cartridge, and you want them to automatically link back up, that's done through domain matching. So
gotcha.
Other LMSs handle it differently. Some will just allow you to create multiple and sort of try and do some domain matching where they can, and don't always match it up correctly. But also some LMSs will let you register at a like an institution or site level, and then separately at a course level. So you can kind of overwrite your credentials or your registration or your deployment at a course level or an institution level, rather than having to have it run over the entire site.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I would just add to that there was that the LTI 1.3 model allows for two coarse-grained deployment, what you call multi-tenant versus single tenant was, and so the multi-tenant is more the Blackboard model, where as a developer, it's vendor to vendor. You create your security contract with Blackboard, and then each institutions, when they use your tool, you have a different deployment, but there is a single negotiation of the OAuth OpenID contract. It's really between Blackboard and your tool. Whereas an other LMS is typically Moodle. It's really the opposite. Every site is going to have its full registration. And so in the context of Moodle, you're going to have what we call an LTI deployment. Usually you will have only one. It's going to match a client ID. It's going to be one-to-one. One client ID, one deployment in Moodle, whereas in Blackboard, one client ID, many deployment, and each deployment identifying usually another institution. And this is the two models that are supported, and so you find them both. And that's why when we want to identify a deployment, we say it's very important to use the three identifiers: issuer, client ID, and LTI deployment ID, because that's the only three things that uniquely identifies the deployment. And in some cases, the deployment ID and client ID will be one-to-one. Some cases, it will be one-to-many. But again, that's going to be more of a platform. And some LMS might actually support both, where they would allow you a central registration and local registration also at the same time. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the limitation with Blackboard is really just a product limitation where we understand the concept of an institutional hierarchy where you've got an institution, say UCLA, and you've got many different schools or departments within that institution. There's nothing preventing us other than writing code to allow you to deploy the same tool with the same domain to different institutions, and each one getting a different different departments, each one getting a different deployment ID. So you would register it once with Blackboard because you've got this registration once, but you could ostensibly, theoretically deploy it multiple times within a Learn instance. We just need to write that code. We've just never supported that concept before since LTI was alive since 10 years ago. So that's on our roadmap to support. We've just never gotten a ton of pressure to support that until recently.
Yeah, and I think LTI Advantage is also moving away from course level deployments to more of a central deployment. It doesn't say that it doesn't support it, but the mindset is more like institution drive tool availability more than instructors.
Yeah, we certainly. I mean, there's privacy issues around letting instructors just willy-nilly deploy LTI tools like they used to 10 years ago. But nevertheless, even with an institution directed deployment model, there's nothing that says that the biology department couldn't deploy Turnitin differently than the chemistry department deploying Turnitin and having different billing, identifiers. So actually, in some respects, LTI Advantage with the deployment ID capability actually allows us to do more than we were really able to easily do with the LTI 1.1 situation.
Yeah, Eric makes a good point there. We've had a lot of vendors come and they use that. We recommend to use it for the billing side of it because a lot of them just like, well, this one college at one of our campuses at Penn State may use this thing and they have a different contract, a different rate than maybe a different college or a different campus or different department. And then using those kind of differentiations and deployment IDs can help you on that side to get the billing straight because it shouldn't be on the institution to say, hey, here's your entire charge for Penn State. Then Andy, you need to split that up by departments and the number of users. We've had vendors ask us that. So there is a solution for that, and then it can be kind of resolved. It's just you need to design for that as well.
Now, there's nothing to say you can't get fancy with DNS and have multiple instances of the same tool deployed that way. But again, at least with the way Blackboard Learn works, it's all going to show up for everybody. So it's better to push us to support multiple deployments per institution.
Thanks for that clarification. I have one quick follow-up question, if there's time.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So you mentioned that the triple tuple of issuer deployment ID and client ID being useful to identify a particular LTI 1.3 deployment. I get that right?
Yep.
In this, and maybe I missed something. In LTI 1.3, what is the client ID referring to here in that triple?
That's the OAuth client ID.
Got it. OAuth client ID. Thank you.
Yeah. So it is the identifier of the registration on the platform or the OAuth provider.
Yeah, I think OAuth provider ID was in my head and I was not making the connection to client ID. That's all.
So we purposely moved away from calling things provider and consumer,
Right.
because in LTI 1.1 we had tool providers and tool consumers, and then in LTI 1.3 where we introduced OAuth, provider and consumer are flipped in the OAuth world. So it would have been very confusing to have both parties as both consumers and providers. So that's why we try and refer to things as platform and tool instead now.
That makes sense. Cool.
All right, any other questions? Or if Claude, Martin, Eric, or Andy didn't get to conclude anything that you wanted to before we jumped right into questions, feel free.
Just there is on the MS specification, there is a migration document, so feel free to have a look at it. It kind of contains what I want over the slides there. They're all written in that little specification there. And again, some of those claims are optional, so it's going to be really up to your LMS to give you the fine details about what's available. I'm mostly mentioning the LTI 1.1 migration claim, and the LMS will tell you if the your user ID and context ID are preserved. As we've seen today, they are, but some platforms may have had to do some changes there.
I just put a link to the document in the chat as well, migration guide. Okay, any other questions or comments? All right, thanks, especially to our presenters. Grateful for your wisdom and being willing to share all of that, and would invite all of you to attend our roundtable meetings to get more involved. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.